This is LBC, the Nigel Farage Show. Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Tweet at LBC using the hashtag Farage on LBC.
Against him. That Moscow could blackmail him at any moment. It was, in fact, the first press conference that he's done since becoming president-elect, and he says he has no deals or no loans with Russia at all. However, what Trump did say is that improved relations with Putin and Russia would be an asset to the USA going forward. Here's just a little clip of what he's been saying this evening.
If Putin likes Donald Trump, I consider that an asset, not a liability. Because we have a horrible relationship with Russia. Russia can help us fight ISIS, which, by the way, is number one tricky. I mean, if you look, this administration created ISIS by leaving at the wrong time. The void was created, ISIS was formed. If Putin likes Donald Trump, guess what, folks? That's called an asset, not a liability. Now, I don't know that I'm going to get along with Vladimir Putin. I hope I do, but there's a good chance I won't. And if I don't, do you honestly believe that Hillary would be tougher on Putin than me? Does anybody in this room really believe that? Give me a break.
Have to say, I am completely and utterly 100% behind what the Donald is saying on this. I've spent the last few years listening to British politicians, European politicians, Hillary Clinton, Obama, making Putin out to be the devil. It's almost as if they want to have this hate figure. And we mustn't talk to him, and we mustn't engage with him, and we must have as many military exercises as we possibly can in the Baltic states. Putin is the enemy. And as a parting shot, one of the things that Obama has done is to expel 35 Russian diplomats. I think it's pretty safe to say that we are now back in a new Cold War relationship where RAF planes are following Russian planes close to British space. We've seen the Navy from Russia going down past the White Cliffs of Dover. It's sort of back to the future, isn't it? We're back to the bad old days. And one of the things that Trump has been saying very consistently is that actually he just wants to talk to Putin. And I've always been of the view that jaw is better than war. I am firmly of the view that the foreign policy that the European Union have been following, where they try to expand to the east constantly, actually is seen by Putin as a threat. And my view on this for some years now has been, I don't particularly like Putin. I wouldn't want to move to Moscow. I certainly wouldn't want to be a journalist living and working in Moscow. Otherwise, I might just disappear, as many have. But it does seem to me that we've been provoking Putin quite deliberately. We encouraged and helped the overthrow of a directly elected democratic prime minister in the Ukraine. It was done by people waving European Union flags. I think we played this very badly. So my view is, I think Trump should go and talk to Putin. What is to be lost? But my question to you this evening, is Donald Trump right to try and build a relationship with Putin? To get involved, please call me on 0345 6060 973. You can text me on 84850. You can tweet me on @LBC with the hashtag Farage on LBC. And you can watch the show on Facebook Live. Go to lbc.co.uk or go to LBC's Facebook page now. And the first caller is Kathleen from Wokingham. Good evening, Kathleen. Is Trump right to try and meet and talk to Putin?
Good evening, Mr. Farage. I think he's doing the right thing. The old saying goes, keep your friends close, but keep your enemies closer. Isn't it a better way to treat people? Surely. You know, he's going to be new to the job. I think what you see is what you get with Mr. Trump. And it's refreshing.
Well, Kathleen, you put that beautifully and succinctly, and I have to say I'm going to find it very difficult to take issue with you. There are some, of course, who would say that Vladimir Putin's behaviour towards, as I mentioned earlier, disappearing journalists, some of the thuggery, even perhaps murder that we've seen on London streets, with his annexation of the Crimea. There are some that would say that Putin's values are very different to ours in the West, that actually he's a bad man, and so because of that we shouldn't talk to him. How would you respond to that?
Well, as I just said, I think you keep your friends close, but you keep your enemies closer. And because he's fresh to the job and he's never been a politician, I think we stand a better chance with Donald Trump. And if he doesn't get on with it, if they don't get on with each other, then it will come to an end and something will be done. There'll be protection in advance. But I think he will get on with him, and the better they get on, the better it is for the world.
Well, certainly during the campaign, Kathleen, it was really interesting because Trump was saying some pretty strong things about Mexico, wasn't he? And Mexicans, some of whom he said weren't behaving as well as they ought to when they come to America. I was gobsmacked when Trump flew down to Mexico to meet the president. And I think, Kathleen, that sets the tone for the way that Trump's going to do things. You know, he's a businessman. He's a deal maker. And people like that don't send each other emails. People like that sit down with each other, talk to each other, have lunch together, and try and find common ground and common interest. And, Kathleen, I completely and utterly agree with you. It's the right thing to do. I'm certain he'll do it. And come on, folks, what on earth is to be lost? Kathleen, thank you very much indeed for your call. Peter in Wimbledon, should Trump go and meet Putin and try and find some common ground?
Of course he should. Like with any dictator, you need to negotiate with him first. And Nigel, what you're doing is basically you're confusing two different matters. What you're forgetting is not British or European politicians or West who makes Putin look bad. It's Putin himself by invading and annexing parts of other countries in Europe. And you are trying to portray it like it's a fault of victims that they've been attacked. You know, countries like Georgia and Ukraine have been invaded and their territories have been taken away from them. And you are pretending now that it's a West fault for Putin being bad. Putin is bad because he is bad. And the only way you can stop him, like any bully, by standing up to him. That's what the West needs to do. And Trump needs to talk to Putin and tell Putin to pack things up. Otherwise, somehow it beggars belief politicians of your caliber coming up on the national radio and trying to appease the person who murdered journalists, murdered opposition politicians in his country, invades other countries, takes part of their countries, annex the territory of the other countries, and you are defending. You're trying to
Peter, I don't want to appease him. I don't want to defend him. I think the future integrity of NATO is actually very important, and I think there is a lot of work to be done on NATO, which has found itself in a position where most of its members now think they can get away without paying the membership fee, and I do believe in all of those things. But I've made the point, Peter, I wouldn't want to live in Putin's Russia. I don't approve of many of the things that he's done, but what I'm arguing, Peter, is that the European Union, and they've dragged NATO in their wake, have pursued a very ignorant, a very foolish foreign policy by constant eastwards expansion and trying to get countries that border Putin's Russia to join our political union in the West.
Nigel, I've got a surprise for you.
Go on.
You have to realise that the countries would like to join NATO voluntarily. And the reason they're doing this, because they're afraid of Russia. If Russia wasn't the country who invades other countries, that these Eastern European countries, small countries, would never seek a NATO membership. That is the reason why they're joining NATO. And they're doing this again, voluntarily. And you have to write it down for yourself. These countries are looking for collective defense against the country who is known for invading and taking parts of their countries. This happened before in history, going back in the last century, this century. Russia has done it before. That's why these countries are joining, looking for collective membership, collective defense.
So why? Yes, but why are we, Peter? Why are we with the Ukraine, for example, via the European Union, doing everything we can to try and drag them in a westward direction with pre-accession aid and everything else? Wouldn't it have been a more intelligent foreign policy to leave a buffer state between us and Russia rather than trying to drag them into our orbit? Wouldn't that have been a cleverer thing to do?
Well, it's not actually, Nigel, you're wrong here again.
Go on.
It's not up to the West or anyone else. It's up to Ukrainian people to decide where they want to be. And Ukrainian people made a choice. They wanted to be part of Western civilized democracies, not part of Russia where again, politicians and journalists are murdered. This is what Ukrainian people done. They stood up against the dictator who was a Putin puppet in Ukraine. They overthrown him. and they all thrown him, and they took the direction. What Putin has done, he's surrounded himself by people like Belarus, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan. Look who's Putin's allies are. Only the countries who are dictatorship
Well,
like themselves.
Peter,
Go.
the Ukraine is very split. Public opinion in the Ukraine is split down the middle, as you and I both know.
Listen,
I
Nigel,
think we've been foolish.
Don't give me this, Nigel, I was born in Ukraine, yeah?
Yep.
I spent 20 years in Ukraine. And you telling me Ukraine's opinion split isn't split. Ukraine has been invaded, and Ukraine has got a massive problem in their hands dealing with a major nuclear power. And I'm just telling you now,
Do you think that Vladimir Putin would have done what he did in the Crimea had it not been for the European Union and NATO trying to drag the Ukraine into their union?
Well, again, no one was drugging anyone. You're asserting you're
yes,
wrong.
they. Oh, Peter. Yes, they were. They've been
Ukrainian people.
Peter, they were. They've been doing it for years, and actually, the biggest cheerleaders for it were David Cameron and George Osborne, who for a decade tried to use every incentive they could to get Ukraine to join the.
It's up. Where they want to go, Nigel.
Yes, and it's not up to. It's not up to. It's not up to the Ukrainian people to say we can join the European Union. It's up to the European Union to exert an intelligent foreign policy, and they haven't done it. I get your passion. I understand how you feel about your country, but I repeat the point. I don't think we've behaved very intelligently. Peter, would you meet Putin and talk to him about these things?
Well, like any dictator, again, you first start with negotiations, and again, the Russia poses the biggest threat to
well, I tell you what, Peter.
For one only reason.
Let's try and meet him. Anyway, Peter, I love it, but I've got to move on. The question we're asking, is Trump right to try and build this relationship with Putin? You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show exclusively on LBC. It's 7:15. Well, is Donald Trump right to at least try and build a relationship with Putin? And before the break, we had Peter, who was a Ukrainian, who very much wanted the Ukraine to go in a westwards direction, and a little bit of feedback on text to that conversation. One here, think that caller Peter will find that the US, often with our help, has invaded many more countries than Vladimir Putin ever has. That's Mitch from North London. In fact, a whole mass of texts, tweets and Facebook messages coming in. Putin is just like Trump in the way he deals with issues. The rebels were armed and created by the West, and Putin is a better man than Obama. No issues with Russia. They are the only straight-talking superpower left at the moment. That one's anonymous, but there's a fan of Putin, and there are many, actually, around the place who think that Putin is a strong national leader, and what people forget is that actually he's pretty popular in his own country. Isn't it funny, Nigel, how the supposed tolerant side of the argument would rather keep tensions high with Putin than break peace between America and Russia? Well, that's the point I've been making. It's as if we've built up this bogeyman that we hate. We haven't got to approve of him or what he does, but he's become the bogeyman, and we're back in a new Cold War. I don't like that. Another one here, Nigel, Trump is a breath of fresh air. He will make friends with Putin, unlike Obama or Clinton would have done. Tom in Basingstoke. And our first caller on this issue, is Trump right to try to build this relationship, is Craig from Ipswich. Good evening.
Hi, Nigel. I just want to say the last caller, Peter, made a lot of good points.
Yep.
So the question is, should we build a relation with Putin? And I want to ask you, are you really eager to build a relationship with someone that, flies Russian planes so close to our airspace, to the point where we need to scramble Typhoon jets to intercept? Are you really eager to do that? I mean, what's your opinion on that, Nigel? Come on.
I'll tell you, Craig, what my opinion is. I don't particularly like Vladimir Putin, and I wouldn't invite him round to meet Mum for tea, but I don't particularly want to go to war with Vladimir Putin, and I think by re-entering a new Cold War with this constant diatribe against Putin, and as if all the ills in the West are caused by him, I think we've got a deteriorating set of relationships between the West and between Russia. And I think, Craig, if we could say to ourselves that perhaps George is better than war, I don't think there is anything to be lost by sitting down and trying to talk to him. And if Trump comes up with, a Reykjavik summit, let's say, later on this year in Iceland, and does what, Reagan and Gorbachev did all those years ago, surely, Craig, that would be a better thing than where we are now.
Definitely. Nobody wants to go to war with Russia. Nobody in the world wants to see that. That would be catastrophic. However, do you not think it's a bit, dumbstruck of Putin to put us in the position where we need to scramble and retaliate, to him flying planes? I mean, surely, if you could say anything to Putin about those stupid, antics that he's doing, I mean, even though we don't want a war, we can't just, sit back and not.
This is LBC, the Nigel Farage Show. Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Tweet at LBC using the hashtag Farage on LBC.
Cat and mouse game that we saw all through the years of the Cold War being repeated. We want him to behave better. We want some assurances from him on hacking, etc. And in return, what we're going to do is we're going to stop threatening his space. We're going to stop this ever eastwards expansion as a gesture that says we do not wish to provoke him. And let's at least try to find some common ground. Because, Craig, let me just tell you one thing. You see, I think there is an absolute key to this. Whatever our differences with Putin may be, and yes, they are substantial, there is one issue on which I believe we're absolutely on the same side. And this issue is the biggest threat that we in the West face as a challenge to our way of life, our security, indeed our happiness, and that is the threat of ISIS and radical Islamic terrorism. That's the biggest threat we face, Craig. And I think that on that issue, we have to recognise that we and Putin have a shared interest in dealing with this. And that's my argument, Craig, and I hope you accept that.
Definitely. And, like I said, it's always better to be friends than enemies. I just hope that Putin doesn't turn out that if we do make friends with him, he'll turn around and stab us in the back.
Well, Craig, there are always the risks with a deal that people can break them, but better right now that we try than have this continued deterioration and lack of coordinated action against ISIS. And I thank you very much for your call. I wonder what Ray in Stoke thinks about trying to build relations with that difficult man, Putin.
Hi, Nigel. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. So what do you think?
The two most powerful men in the world are breaking bread. It's a good thing.
Yeah.
But my biggest concern is with the recent results with Brexit and Trump getting elected. By the way, I didn't have a horse in that race, but I found, especially with the BBC, the media in this country is so anti-Trump. I found I wanted him to win. And I don't. Well, that's how it was. That's how they are making people, because they're so anti whatever it is, and it's 24/7. And what my concern is, do you think the media will give them a fair crack at a chance of forming a relationship?
Do you know what? When it comes to the media, I'm not sure, as far as Mr. Trump's concerned, he could give a damn. If you saw the press conference tonight, there were media organisations he was just refusing to take questions from, saying, you're fake news. He's not a great fan of CNN. But I get your point here, Ray, because I actually think that what BuzzFeed have done today by putting this clearly false dossier out, I think they've damaged themselves. And I spoke, Ray, about an hour before coming on the programme, I spoke to a mate who is very close to Team Trump and just sort of said, well, how are the people behind the scenes, behind McDonald, how are they feeling about this story? And they said, well, publicly, we'll say we're very upset and we're very angry. Privately, it's just making more and more people think that the establishment and the liberal media are out to get Trump. And what that does, it actually strengthens and consolidates support behind him. So I begin to think today, Ray, we may not be looking, and some people are going to hate this, we may not be looking at 4 years of Trump, we may well be looking at 8 years of Trump, and the media are helping him do it. Ray, you've got your finger on the pulse. Some Facebook messages coming in. Jill Burdett says, well done to caller Peter. He knew what he was talking about from first-hand experience. Weak attempt by Farage to blame the Ukraine situation on the EU. Well, Jill, I really do. I think we've made a terrible foreign policy error. Edward Senior says, not defending Putin, but we in the West militarily overran 3 nations and tried to force democracy on them at the cost of thousands of lives. Matt Seymour, Blair far more of a warmonger than Putin. So, lots of ranges of opinion on this. I will read out one more text. Nigel, a good relationship between the United States and the Russian Federation is in the world's best interests. I believe the future threat to peace will come from China and its totalitarian government. Regards, Alan. I don't know, Alan, whether that's right or not. What I do know is that ISIS is posing a threat to our way of life, and I repeat the point, and I mean it. On this, we're on the same side as Putin. I wonder what Matthew in Cardiff thinks of this.
Hello there, Nigel. How are you today?
I'm very well, and you?
Very good, thank you. Really good to allow me on your show, sir. Very, very kind of you.
So, what do you think, Matthew?
What I actually think, absolutely Trump and Putin, if they can make some sort of headway, make the United States and Russia friends, if not friends, at least acquaintances on many world issues, I think it would be an absolute great thing, because I think we've got a problem with our own history. We keep on forgetting, that not everything's black and white, and I think we are also keeping our eye. We are not putting our eye on the horizon, and the horizon, I believe, is actually China. China is a much bigger threat to global security than Russia is. And the reason why I say that, you just have a look at what's happening in the South China Sea.
Yep.
We also, I think we've kept our arm off the ball with Africa. Now, India may have put a bit of money into Africa, but not much. China has been sending in hundreds of billions of dollars into many African states. They're building their highways. They're modernizing many of the states. And I would not hasten to believe that in the next few years, China will sign a deal with an African nation and put its first military base outside of mainland China.
Certainly, Matthew, there is a sort of form of economic imperialism coming from China, and it's very interesting that Donald Trump took that call from Taiwan. Clearly, he's going to reverse America's one China policy and recognise publicly who Taiwan are. And this idea that Trump is soft, I don't believe it to be the case. But there's two of you in a row who have thought that perhaps China is the real threat in the long term. Whether you're right or not, I repeat, ISIS is a greater threat in the short term to us, and that is where we have a common cause, I think, with Trump, and Putin, all of us, to sit down and talk together. So is Donald Trump right to try and build a relationship with Putin? Please call me on 0345 6060 973. Tweet me on @LBC with the hashtag Farage and LBC. And you can watch the show live. Go to lbc.co.uk or to LBC's Facebook page. Watch me. Watch the public having a go at me. See how I'm getting on. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show exclusively here on LBC. It's 7:30 and time for the news with Rupert Bartier.
The Nigel Farage Show on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
Well, we're talking about the world's two most talked about men, Trump and Putin, and whether Trump should try and reach out, meet him, and see whether they can find common ground and build a relationship. But just one other little story today that I've noticed. Mark Carney, the Governor of the Bank of England, who I have actually called repeatedly for him to resign, stand down, be sacked, because I felt that his behaviour during the Brexit campaign was not that of a neutral civil servant. But Carney today, very interestingly, is saying, and he's talking specifically about financial services and Britain's banking sector, which is big, as you know, and he's saying today that the scale of the risks around Brexit have gone down in the United Kingdom. In fact, Brexit could have a greater impact on the EU than it could in the UK. There are greater short-term risks on the continent. So do I take back everything I've said about Mark Carney? No. But you know what, folks? We're not going to fall off a cliff with Brexit. Actually, Brexit poses a much bigger financial risk to France and Germany and other countries in Europe than it does to us. All of which says that people like Mr. Juncker ought to be sensible about offering us a proper trade deal. We'll do that another evening. So Trump, the big press conference today, and we played a big clip of it at the start of this show. I thought what was really interesting about today was, yeah, sure, Trump was aggressive with news organizations that he despises, but generally the tone of Trump today, it was very measured, it was very in control. It was a man who in just, 8-9 days' time is taking over as president of the USA. And I have to say, I think he looks very much in control. I think support for him across America is growing. People are realizing that he's not the devil. And I am looking forward to being there next Friday. And it's going to be cold, I think. But I should be there watching him swearing in, and I will share all of those experiences and all of those thoughts with you here on LBC. But for now, is Donald Trump right to try and build that relationship? And a growing number of you wanting to watch this on Facebook Live, it's easy to do. You go to lbc.co.uk or to LBC's Facebook page. But equally, you can call on 0345 6060 973, or you can tweet me on @LBT with the hashtag Farage on LBC. Or, of course, you can text 84850, and lots of you are. A good one here. Hi, Nigel. Donald must talk to Putin, but not accept any tea. Yvonne in Hastings, I like that. Radioactive tea would not be a good idea. I wonder what Eric in Kensington makes of all of this. Eric, good evening.
Hello. Just want to say I'm a huge fan. I really think you're truly one of the heroes of the world and everything that you've done. So I want to say I'm a huge fan. But
that's very sweet of you. Very sweet of you, Eric. But come on, what should Trump be doing with Putin?
Thank you. So I really think we really need to be friends with Putin. I think he's willing to help us beat globalism and keep the great nation-state system, which is what Obama has wanted to eliminate, the nation-state system. And I love saying wanted, past tense, and Merkel has wanted and continues to want. And I really believe we really need all the help we can get to beat globalism. And as kind of a side effect of that really helps out the West and saves the West in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, that is why, of course, there are, political leaders around Europe who do have a grudging admiration for Putin, because they do see him as being a national leader and not part of this process where nation states give away their democratic rights, their legal rights, they surrender to higher courts and other orders. So, yeah, Eric, I get that. I understand that. The only worry is just, is Putin dangerous? And as I've said already in this hour, I don't approve of what's happened to journalists. I don't approve of what's happened in London streets. I'm not happy about the annexation of the Crimea or any of it. But to try and build a constructive relationship and to put to an end this modern Cold War, Eric, I think would be a good thing. And thank you. What does Jason in Wolverhampton think of this?
Firstly, hello, Nigel there. I'm thinking that I really don't think it is a good idea that there is putting such pressure on Putin. I really think that having a stable relationship between the US, Russia, and the UK and all that for one, would really be a lot better than just continuing this anti-Russian aggression that seems to be going on near the end of the Obama administration.
Yep, I agree with that.
And I also think that, it's not going to be, we're not calling Putin the good guy here. Obviously, we're not going to say he's the only honest politician in the modern-day era. That would obviously be a stretch. But I really think that just completely villainizing him when he is still going for a lot of the good intentions that we are. He's fighting ISIS, we're fighting ISIS. It's they're kind of focusing on the bad things, but I really don't think they're going to talk about any of the good things that Putin are really doing.
No, well, Jason, I get what you're saying, and again, you make the point about ISIS, and I think this is really quite central to why we need to be talking and hopefully trusting and cooperating. It may not be possible, and Trump said that today. He said, look, I'm going to try. You heard it in the clip earlier. I'm going to try. I may not succeed, but I am going to try. And I think, Jason, you and I agree it's the right thing to do. A couple of interesting Facebook messages. Andrew says, Putin is looking after the Russians in Crimea in exactly the same way as the UK does with Northern Ireland. Putin was correct. Interesting. Mark says if we tried treating Putin with a little more respect for once, we might just see a different side to the man. We swallowed our differences with the IRA after all. Phil in Peckham, what do you make of this?
Nigel,
hello.
I was laying there this afternoon at 4 o'clock, waiting in anticipation, and that man did not foul me in one word that he said. But what was really positive about him, I think he's going to normalise politics. He's just going to come down as squeaky clean as me and you walking in the street having a conversation. But most importantly, what was really made my day, we're not at the back of the queue.
Oh, I know. I know.
Lovely.
Isn't it marvellous, Phil? Isn't it and we've heard the news that it's now pretty much certain that the bust of Winston Churchill will go back in the Oval Office when President Trump takes over. And doesn't that just signify that we are now at the front of the queue? And I'm so pleased that when I went to visit him just 3 or 4 days after he'd been elected, that I had the cheek to ask for that to be put back as a gesture. I think, I'll tell you what...
I'm going to be honest when I say this, but I think he's going to be something, he's going to turn out similar to probably a JFK or something like that. He's going to go over there, he's going to talk rather than walk, and something's going to happen. However, in the back room there, in the sort of back of my mind, I am thinking, you know, he is an ex-KGB, and I do have concerns about that, because if Trump does get duped in any way, I'm not really too sure what he would do. And to be honest, could you say that you would know what he would do? Or would you find him very unpredictable?
What, Trump?
Yeah.
I don't think... No, I mean, look, Trump he's a larger-than-life character. He says what he thinks. He will, like all businessmen, he will go with a view until he thinks it's wrong to continue having that view, and then he'll change. And if he was to try and build a relationship with Putin, and if at any point in that time Putin broke faith or broke trust with him, he would very quickly say, that's an end to it. But I think, Phil, the point is that he wants to try, and I agree with you, I think this guy is going to be a success. I think when you see the news from Ford, when you see the news from Carrier, the factory that was kept open, when you see the fact that he's going to do everything he can, frankly, he may even try and bully companies to stay in America, but he is going to create blue-collar jobs, and I think actually, through much of, the sort of Midwest and those areas, he's got the chance, actually, to make himself a really serious hero. Texts and tweets ploughing in. This one's interesting. A tweet here. Putin and the West stand together against extremism. A deal between the US and Russia can help the fight against this. Nigel, Churchill spoke to Stalin during World War II, even though he had little time for him. That's an understatement. He absolutely hated him. It should be easier to talk to Putin, although Obama made a hash of it, and that comes in from Alan. And lastly, would you be willing to be an intermediary between the Trump camp and the Putin camp? Crikey, I think that one is a little bit above my pay grade, but it's really a fun idea. So the question we're asking is Donald Trump right to try and build a relationship with Putin? And coming up, I'll give you my final thought on this debate. But right now, you're listening to the Nigel Farage Show exclusively here on LBC. It's 7:45.
This is LBC, the Nigel Farage Show. Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Tweet at LBC using the hashtag Farage on LBC.
Well, is Donald Trump right to try and build this relationship with Putin? I certainly think he is, and I'll give you my full final thought on this in a few minutes. The majority of people who are texting, tweeting, Facebooking, calling in, think that at least talking, surely, is better than where we are now, where we've got the Cold War back, I'm afraid. Alex in Hackney, what do you think of this?
Yeah, I think Donald Trump is absolutely spot on with regards to Russia. I think the West and Europe's foreign policy towards Russia has been completely wrong ever since the end of the Cold War. And in fact, I think now what we're actually doing with our actions in Ukraine, because we essentially encourage the overthrow of a democratically elected leader, is we're propping up Putin. If you look at Putin's approval ratings before then, his approval ratings were dropping year after year after year because Russia has a lot of social problems. But whenever we intervene in their sphere of influence, all that happens is Russians go, oh my goodness, look, the West is threatening Russia again.
Yes.
Putin's approval ratings go through the roof. So if you really want to see Russia become a more friendly, democratic, Western-style nation, stop interfering in their affairs and their sphere of influence.
Interesting point, Alex. And I would guess also that the popularity of Russian leaders would probably coincide quite closely with commodity prices, wouldn't it? Because it is oil and nickel and these sort of things, gas, these sort of things that Russia produces in huge numbers, without which its economy just could not exist, could it?
Exactly, yeah.
So they're very, very vulnerable. And, yeah, you know, if you look at the prices of oil and gas now, they're a lot lower than they were a few years ago. So the idea is, Alex makes the point, every time we meddle, every time we interfere, we actually help Putin and make him more popular. And I suspect that's probably right. Alex, thank you. Next we go to Prakash in Camberwell. Is Trump right to have a go, Prakash?
Hi, Nigel. Good evening.
Good evening.
I think he's absolutely right. And I think one of the sort of practical areas where I think we could potentially, or at least Trump could potentially work with Russia on, is that of Syria. Now, the West policy on Syria has been very confused. On the one hand, it's been supporting the jihadis against the Syrian government to secure regime change, and in that they've ended up inadvertently supporting ISIS, but then they've also got a policy of removing ISIS. So their policies have been contradictory, and I think the Russians have been very, very clear because, A, they've gone in there to support an ally and to secure their naval base, but also they've been very clear about what their objectives are. And I think they're probably more effective in removing ISIS, and I think what the Americans could do very well is work with Russia in terms of freezing their bank accounts and making it impossible and stopping the sale of weapons into the Middle East.
Yeah, well,
and I think that collaboration would help to resolve that problem in Syria.
Well, Prakash, I have to say, I am pleased that in 2013 the House of Commons did not vote for us to arm the rebels in Syria, because I'm with you. Difficult to tell actually who these rebels were. Would we have found ourselves actually funding ISIS? And that worries me. I think, Prakash, one other just little thought on this is that the other thing about Trump that people need to sort of hoist on board is that he is going to be much more non-interventionist than Hillary Clinton would have been. It's funny how the Democrats are almost now become the neocons. Prakash, thank you very much for that call. We go next to Peggy in Basildon. Peggy, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. Great to hear you talk some sense. And I loved listening to Trump today. I listened to his speech.
Yep.
Of course we should be talking to Putin. For God's sake, how do you know anybody until you talk to them? I'm sick of the snowflakes we've got, and we've got to have strong men to lead us in this. Well, we need them in our country, let alone America and Russia. It's so good to hear him talking straight from the shoulder, like you do yourself.
So you're a sort of Trump fan, Peggy, are you?
I really am. I'm sick to death of the minorities winning all around the world, and how weak we are now.
How weak we are?
Well, we got politicians, they say one thing and do another. They don't come out. That's why they find it so offensive when Trump and Putin speak straight. They're not used to it. No. Everyone's sensibilities are offended today.
Yeah, well, I have to say, Peggy, I thought Trump handled that press conference today extremely well, but it is amusing and different to see him totally refusing to take questions from mainstream broadcasters like CNN. It's a completely different style, Peggy. Let's hope that it's a great, great success. Thank you. A tweet coming in here. Talk, yes, but on our terms and find a middle ground, from David Marshall. Yes, David, I don't think anyone is suggesting that we just say to Putin, please do what you like and we'll agree with it. This is not about appeasement. Of that, I am certain. Text, I hope Trump ain't going to be another JFK. He brought us to the brink of nuclear war, says Graham. It was interesting. A previous caller said that JFK was a hero-type figure. Yeah, there were many things, not just about that, but in fact about the beginnings of the conflict in Vietnam that could have been JFK's legacy, but of course he was assassinated, and so we think of him in a different way. One more text. Nigel, I believe that Trump should try and get a good relationship with Putin. There are too many who will be quick to use weapons rather than have intelligent dialogue first. This is why the world is in utter chaos most of the time. Maddie in Hounslow. But we go next to Andy in Nottingham to say, what should Trump do, and on what terms should this conversation take place?
Good evening, Nigel. Absolute pleasure to be talking to you.
Good evening.
Totally agree. I think it's long overdue. It's about time we had somebody sit down and actually talk to Russia. We know back in the 80s it worked. We've had a big gap in between. And now it's time for some new talks. Sit down. Let's find out what the problems are on both sides. There's a few caveats, but we need to iron it out. It's two superpowers. We don't need to be bickering. We know there's issues with Russia. We know they've done some things. But is it because we're strangling them with all of the sanctions? Is it because they're sort of biting at what we're doing to them? We need to come to an agreement.
I think those tensions will continue, and I'll tell you why. Unbeknown to most people, there was a referendum last April in the Netherlands, and the referendum was on the moves towards the accession of Ukraine into the European Union, right?
Yes.
And the Dutch people in that referendum voted against it. Do you know what the Dutch government have done? They've just decided to completely ignore the people and to plough on with the relationship. So the one thing you can be certain of, Andy, is that the European Union is hell-bent on continuing with this eastward expansion. So I think a change of policy, a different approach would be a good and a healthy thing. Andy, thank you for your call. I wonder what John in Northampton thinks about what we're doing here. John, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. Breath of fresh air, isn't he, Donald Trump? But, recently I watched Theresa May in Saudi Arabia cozying up to the royal family there. We've seen Prince Charles there on many occasions. This is a brutal regime that has an abysmal history on human rights. I mean, recently a young girl of 19 raped, was given 200 lashes.
I know.
Which was more than the guy that raped her because she was out without a chaperone.
I know.
I mean, and these are the people we cozy up to.
Yeah, and Saudi Arabia, who have refused to take one single migrant or refugee from the war in Syria, and yet are about to fund the building of 200 new mosques in Germany, and are pushing a cult of Wahhabism. John, this is a different debate for a different evening, but I do agree with you. More Facebook messages. Jim says, I think we should be more afraid of the EU than Russia. I might just mention that in my final thought. And Dan, what about the human rights abuses in Russia? Dan, of course, there are a lot of things that happen in that country that we don't like. And the last caller I'm going to take this evening is Jack in Glasgow. Jack, good evening.
Hi, Nigel. I just want to say that sometimes, I think a lady earlier was talking about shooting from the hip and politicians shooting from the hip. And sometimes I don't think it's such a good thing, because sometimes we require more thought when we say things. And when Donald Trump shoots from the hip and talks about Mexicans being rapists, that's not a good thing. And it's not a good thing that we should cheer from. I understand that some politicians obviously don't lie, but they try and skim the truth sometimes. But sometimes shooting from the hip isn't such a good thing, and we should maybe think more before supporting them. And being in bed with Putin, not being in bed, but having an alliance with Putin also might not be such a good thing, because Putin's obviously a dictator and is harsh to his own people.
Jack,
so what's so good about that?
Jack, we're not arguing that he's a good guy. What we're saying is that tensions are building, and perhaps it would be intelligent to talk to him. Thank you. My final thought on this is I think we need to rethink our behaviour. I think this constant eastwards expansion of the European Union, coupled to the fact they are now building a European Union army, worries me. We are back in a Cold War. We're back in shadow boxing. Whether Putin is a threat or not, let's please stop poking the Russian bear with a stick. It simply doesn't make sense. And there's only one man that's going to break this deadlock, and that man is Donald J. Trump. And you can like him, you can hate him, but one thing for certain, he's going to do things differently. He will give this a go. There will be a meeting in Reykjavik or somewhere at some point during this year. I wish him luck. I hope we do find some common ground. I hope we do manage to coordinate better in the fight against ISIS. And what I'm certain of is we will have lost absolutely nothing in doing this. Our leaders in this country, in the EU and the rest of the West haven't got the vision. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. I'll be back tomorrow night. I hope you've enjoyed the show. Coming up at 10, it's Ian Collins, but next, it's Clive Bull.
Thank you, Nigel. And coming up at 9, it's the Legal Hour. Barrister Daniel...
Union flags. I think we've played this very badly. So my view is, I think Trump should go and talk to Putin. What is to be lost? But my question to you this evening, is Donald Trump right to try and build a relationship with Putin? To get involved, please call me on 0345 6060 973. You can text me on 84850. You can tweet me on @LBC with the hashtag Farage on LBC, and you can watch the show on Facebook Live. Go to lbc.co.uk or go to LBC's Facebook page now. And the first caller is Kathleen from Wokingham. Good evening, Kathleen. Is Trump right to try and meet and talk to Putin?
Good evening, Mr. Farage. I think he's doing the right thing. The old saying goes, keep your friends close, but keep your enemies closer. Isn't it a better way to treat people? Surely. You know, he's going to be new to the job. I think what you see is what you get with Mr. Trump. And it's refreshing.
Well, Kathleen, you put that beautifully and succinctly, and I have to say I'm going to find it very difficult to take issue with you. There are some, of course, who would say that Vladimir Putin's behaviour towards, as I mentioned earlier, disappearing journalists, some of the thuggery, even perhaps murder that we've seen on London streets, with his annexation of the Crimea. There are some that would say that Putin's values are very different to ours in the West, that actually he's a bad man, and so because of that we shouldn't talk to him. How would you respond?
This is LBC, the Nigel Farage Show. Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Tweet @LBC using the hashtag Farage on LBC.
Against him. That Moscow could blackmail him at any moment. It was, in fact, the first press conference that he's done since becoming president-elect, and he says he has no deals or no loans with Russia at all. However, what Trump did say is that improved relations with Putin and Russia would be an asset to the USA going forward. Here's just a little clip of what he's been saying this evening.
If Putin likes Donald Trump, I consider that an asset, not a liability. Because we have a horrible relationship with Russia. Russia can help us fight ISIS, which, by the way, is number one tricky. I mean, if you look, this administration created ISIS by leaving at the wrong time. The void was created, ISIS was formed. If Putin likes Donald Trump, guess what, folks? That's called an asset, not a liability. Now, I don't know that I'm going to get along with Vladimir Putin. I hope I do, but there's a good chance I won't. And if I don't, do you honestly believe that Hillary would be tougher on Putin than me? Does anybody in this room really believe that? Give me a break.
Have to say, I am completely and utterly 100% behind what the Donald is saying on this. I've spent the last few years listening to British politicians, European politicians.
Of victims that have been attacked, you know, countries like Georgia and Ukraine have been invaded and their territory has been taken away from them. And you are pretending now that it's a West fault for Putin being bad. Putin is bad because he's bad. And the only way you can stop him, like any bully, by standing up to him. That's what the West needs to do. And Trump needs to talk to Putin and tell Putin to pack things up. Otherwise, you know, somehow it beggars belief politicians of your caliber coming up on the national radio and trying to appease the person who murdered journalists, murdered opposition politicians in his country, invades other countries, takes part of their countries, annex the territory of the other countries, and you are defending. You're trying to
Peter, I don't want to appease him. I don't want to defend him. I think the future integrity of NATO is actually very important, and I think there is a lot of work to be done on NATO, which has found itself in a position where most of its members now think they can get away without paying the membership fee, and I do believe in all of those things. But I've made the point, Peter, I wouldn't want to live in Putin's Russia. I don't approve of many of the things that he's done, but what I'm arguing, Peter, is that the European Union, and they've dragged NATO in their wake, have pursued a very ignorant, a very foolish foreign policy by constant eastwards expansion and trying to get countries that border Putin's Russia to join our political union in the West.
Nigel.
To that.
Well, as I just said, I think you keep your friends close, but you keep your enemies closer. And because he's fresh to the job and he's never been a politician, I think we stand a better chance with Donald Trump. And if he doesn't get on with it, if they don't get on with each other, then it will come to an end and something will be done. There'll be protection in advance. But I think he will get on with him, and the better they get on, the better it is for the world.
Well, certainly during the campaign, Kathleen, it was really interesting because Trump was saying some pretty strong things about Mexico, wasn't he? And Mexicans, some of whom he said weren't behaving as well as they ought to when they come to America. I was gobsmacked when Trump flew down to Mexico to meet the president. And I think, Kathleen, that sets the tone for the way that Trump's going to do things. You know, he's a businessman. He's a deal maker. And people like that don't send each other emails. People like that sit down with each other, talk to each other, have lunch together, and try and find common ground and common interest. And, Kathleen, I completely and utterly agree with you. It's the right thing to do. I'm certain he'll do it. And come on, folks, what on earth is to be lost? Kathleen, thank you very much indeed for your call. Peter in Wimbledon, should Trump go and meet Putin and try and find some common ground?
Of course he should. Like with any dictator, you need to negotiate with him first. And Nigel, what you're doing is basically you're confusing two different matters. What you're forgetting is not British or European politicians or West who makes Putin look bad. It's Putin himself, by invading and annexing parts of other countries in Europe. And you are trying to portray it like it's a fault.
Politicians, Hillary Clinton, Obama, making Putin out to be the devil. It's almost as if they want to have this hate figure. And we mustn't talk to him, and we mustn't engage with him, and we must have as many military exercises as we possibly can in the Baltic states. Putin is the enemy. And as a parting shot, one of the things that Obama has done is to expel 35 Russian diplomats. I think it's pretty safe to say that we are now back in a new Cold War relationship where RAF planes are following Russian planes close to British space. We've seen the Navy from Russia going down past the White Cliffs of Dover. It's sort of back to the future, isn't it? We're back to the bad old days. And one of the things that Trump has been saying very consistently is that actually he just wants to talk to Putin. And I've always been of the view that jaw is better than war. I am firmly of the view that the foreign policy that the European Union have been following, where they try to expand to the east constantly, actually is seen by Putin as a threat. And my view on this for some years now has been, I don't particularly like Putin. I wouldn't want to move to Moscow. I certainly wouldn't want to be a journalist living and working in Moscow, otherwise I might just disappear, as many have. But it does seem to me that we've been provoking Putin quite deliberately. We encouraged and helped the overthrow of a directly elected democratic prime minister in the Ukraine. It was done by people waving European